and we are so happy that she transitioned to become a filmmaker to build and tell these fantastic stories, so thank you for coming. And also, she just got back today from a trip from Denmark. So she stepped off the plane and came all the way out to Long Island just to be with us tonight, so we're very, very thankful. Also joining Yael, we have wonderful attorneys here. We have Kevin Kearon, who is a founding partner in a Garden City criminal defense law firm called Barkett, Marion, Epstein, and Kearon.
Hello.
We also have Stephen Leventhal, who is an attorney and a CPA and a managing member of the Roslyn General Practice firm of Leventhal, Curcio, Mulaney, and Blinkoff. Welcome, Stephen. And finally, we have Omid Zareh, who's the co-founding partner of Weinberg, Zareh, and Jayarhan, if I'm pronouncing correctly. Okay, close enough. So we welcome you all as they share with us about ethics and dishonesty. And so it's not just about law, but it's also what they'll be sharing about is universal, no matter what your profession is or what your circumstance may be in facing dishonesty. Thank you.
So I'm so curious. I think one can view dishonesty through so many different lenses. So I was so thrilled that this festival chose to take a point of view and to bring lawyers together who have all had an interest in ethics and worked on various ethical boards and committees and commissions, and so I'm really curious for us to get into that. Before we do that, I just want to know if there are any general questions about the film, just so we can get those out of the way. And if not, that's totally fine. We can jump right into the legal side. Sorry?
The guy who's doing insider trades, 4 billion?
No, so there was two friends who engaged in insider trading, and the amount that it's very complicated to know how much they actually stole, but they were what's the term? Convicted. Not convicted. The claim was the charge. Thank you. I got off a plane. That's my excuse. They were charged with having embezzled about $100 million, and it came down to less for each individual. And I should say, actually, because we were talking about it earlier, that Garrett Bauer, the thinner guy who was the investment banker, the trader, he was sentenced to 9 years, and Matt Kluger, the lawyer, was sentenced to 12, and they received some of the stiffest sentences of any insider traders, even though compared to some of the bigger traders, what they did was really peanuts.
Also, if they're doing it because they want to make sure that certain players get the spotlight for the media, isn't that also cheating? I mean, it wasn't really discussed in the film, but it's clearly apparent.
Well, the film is widely available. CNBC showed it. It is interesting that the CNBC version, CNBC chose to put a disclaimer in the basketball section saying that they had tried to contact the NBA and the NBA did not have anything to say. I will say, we are not, I believe Tim Donaghy, that what he did, he felt everybody does as refs in basketball. I believe that, but I also think that it's perfectly legitimate to think that it's just his rationalizing, and that's how he rationalized his own crime. So we are not presenting it as if it is fact or not fact. We're presenting his story as he told it, and the immense conflict of interest that regardless of whether other people do it or not, he felt that he was in, or that we can see that he is facing.
But if you correctly predicted all these games, they clearly had a point.
It's another, that's not, that we're not arguing the validity or not.
He gave games other than once he was refereeing. I'm sure once he was refereeing also, but if he was so good at picking games, he knows the refs at other games, and so it was obviously some sort of pervasive manipulation.
I would agree, but I'm sure the NBA would tell you that you're completely mistaken. And as they have said about him consistently. So it's complicated. The truth is really complicated. Okay, so let's since we have your incredible brains and knowledge and expertise here.
You must have just gotten off a plane.
It would be great to get each of you to talk about why, first of all, why you got interested in ethics, because all of you share that interest and experience. And then maybe where you face, where you see it as interesting or where this overlaps with your experience.
Shall I begin?
Please.
Firstly, congratulations on this film. I enjoyed this film. I thought it was an excellent film, well made, but mostly because I love the topic. I love the subject matter. And we're lawyers, and we have various positions on so-called ethics boards where we're studying the ethical rules and applying them to individual situations. But I thought the subject matter of the film had universal application to all sorts of people, not just lawyers, and would be a great thing to show a wide number of categories of people. I loved the concept of the children being taught the importance of being honest in India. This film, I think, could be shown to stockbrokers, to lawyers. I don't think there's any category of workers or any industry where people somehow are immune from the sorts of things that we saw here. It is a remarkable thing, truth and honesty. I've seen. We are a very unforgiving society, it appears, when it comes to dealing with so-called cheaters, right? And in a way, all of these people were cheaters. Just look in the papers today. You can see half a dozen topical examples of cheating or dishonesty. There's talk of wide...
Make it personal.
Sure. In my case, my background is a criminal defense lawyer. Before that, I was a prosecutor. The issue of truth and or lie or falsity seems to be examined more in the courts than in the average place. Lies, frequently for one reason or another, as depicted here, often ends up in the courts. And ultimately, jurors are the final arbiters. And when you see dishonesty in the courts, all sorts of bad things happen. I truly believe that there's no category of person who's immune from these sorts of things. So you have dishonest lawyers. You have, I'm afraid to say, at least intellectually, dishonest judges. You have dishonest jurors sometimes who misrepresent what their intentions are in terms of getting onto a jury. You have dishonest police officers and the dishonest witnesses of a wide variety of types. And the damage that can be done when people lie is remarkable. I spend half my time in court trying to argue to juries that people are lying. And I find a very effective tool when you're speaking to a jury and trying to persuade them to vote for your side is to identify one demonstrable lie that you can irrefutably establish was told by a witness, whether a police witness or a lay witness. And once you've got the jury convinced, truthfully, that in fact there was one lie, almost no matter how small and insignificant and inconsequential that lie may have been, you can now correctly label that person, label that witness a liar, and make the follow-up argument that how in the world can you trust someone who just under oath lied to you about something, no matter how insignificant?
A different perspective.
I'd like to make a couple of quick points. The first is that, well, I was interviewed prior to the screening of the film. We had our pictures taken. We were treated like big shots. It was a lot of fun. But I was asked by the videographer, how do you deal with the fact that that lying is such a big part of the practice of law? And of course, I said, It isn't. That's not difficult at all. Lawyers are not allowed to lie, and good lawyers don't lie. That's not where the ethical challenges are in the practice of law. There are ethical challenges, perhaps, in the duty to keep information confidential and not fully disclose client confidences when you are otherwise treating with the facts of a particular case. But in but law is really more about the integrity of the process than it is about the result. And the legal system is designed to arrive at a version of the truth. And that version of the truth is what the admissible evidence establishes in court. And I think there is this tendency on the part of people to think that lawyers who are arguing the best possible reading of the evidence on behalf of their client are somehow being dishonest. And that is not dishonesty, in my view. That is the duty of a lawyer. And ultimately, I'd like to take exception with one thing that the brilliant designer of this project did in this film. And that is, I think he fell into the trap that many of us fall into, and that is using the term ethics and the term morality interchangeably, as if they mean the same thing. And in my view, they don't. Morality is about right and wrong. Ethics is about managing conflicting duties and managing conflicting interests. And ethics is challenging. It's difficult. It's not simple. We want to see these questions in black and white. But I think perhaps the most illuminating thing that was said in this film on this particular subject was said by a little girl who said, you know, if your friend is having a surprise party and you lie to your friend about the surprise party, is that wrong? And so I think it's really helpful to distinguish between morality, which is about right and wrong, and ethics, which is what that little girl was doing was she was trying to manage and balance conflicting duties that she recognized. The duty to be truthful, the duty to help her friend have a happy surprise birthday party. And you know, that's a very simple example. These ethical problems can be horrifyingly complex also. And the final thing I'll say before I pass it on to Omid is that in the applied context of the practice of a profession like law, or in the realm of government ethics, the ethical rules, the ethical obligations that you have are reduced to a set of rules. And your ultimate obligation is to obey those rules. And those rules are not handed down from above as the Ten Commandments were. Those rules are developed either by legislatures or by governing bodies of professions. And these governing bodies and these legislative bodies tend to be, it tends to be a deliberative process, a process of horse trading and compromise and differing points of view that ultimately get reconciled and reduced to a single set of rules. So I think it is unhelpful to think of ethics and morality in the same way. And I'll have to tell a quick joke, real fast. Moses comes down from the mountaintop. He's carrying the tablets in his arms. The people are assembled at the base of the mountain waiting for him. And they look up at him and he says, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is I got him down to 10. The bad news is adultery is still in. And so my view is that, that ethics rules should best be thought of as the result of compromise and not moral commandments.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Omid Zareh, and thank you for having us. And I also just wanted to say thank you to the Nassau Academy of Law for making this possible. Kevin and I sit on the ethics committee for the attorneys here in Nassau County. And the reason why I enjoy the topic of ethics and why I really like to tackle the issues is I actually think we're providing a service because the majority, and I would say the overwhelming majority of attorneys try to do the right thing. I think Steve's distinction between morality and ethics is a good one because we all like to believe we're very moral people, well, most of us. And that instinct can lead you to trouble because I really like this person, or they've got something over on me, or the factors that were in this excellent film, everybody else is doing it. It's culturally thought of as it's okay. It's not for me, I'm lying for somebody else. And by the way, I do commercial work. I can't tell you the number of times where an executive says to us something like, well, I wasn't doing it for me, I was doing it for the company, and therefore it's okay. Your instincts oftentimes in the realm of what is the ethical thing to do lead you to the wrong place. And so one of the services I think we provide, and I hope we provide well, is attorneys reach out to us with a conundrum. I have this conflicting interest, and I don't know what to do. My client for the first time told me the truth. And then now I don't know what to do because we've already put it before the court. What do I do? And I think our profession, before you come out of law school, says we know the answers to these questions very easily. You may find it difficult to perform up to the task, but the answers are easy ones. You look at the rule book and it tells you what to do.
But don't you agree that sometimes the analysis of the ethical course of action is not always self-evident? It's not always simple. The hard question is not whether you can steal from an escrow account or not. That's straightforward.
You can't, by the way.
That's not the struggle. But there are circumstances where you realize that it's not clear which of the two directions you should go in. I had a case once where I represented a man who was charged with murder, the gun shooting of a 10-year-old boy. And I had an opportunity through essentially technical means to get certain evidence thrown out of court, which took about 90% of the persuasive power out of the prosecutor's case, basically killed the prosecutor's case. Was that a moral thing for me to do, to take steps to allow what was a cold-blooded killer potentially back out on the streets? Probably not a morally correct action, but ethically, it was 100% what I was required to do. I saw an opportunity to demonstrate a flaw in the government's case that happened to have been based on a lie told by a detective in the case. I pointed it out. I exploited it to the benefit of my client. That evidence, and the evidence that was thrown out of court, by the way, was a videotaped confession to the murder. The jury was never going to learn about that confession. So there are some interesting conundrums that come up sometimes for lawyers.
You know, the criminal practice is a great laboratory for exploring ethical and moral questions. I had a challenge one time, well, several times. One that comes to mind, I was representing a criminal defendant who pled guilty and was promised a sentence of no jail provided she didn't get into trouble between the date the plea was entered and the date the sentence was imposed. A few days later, a week later perhaps, I was in the same courtroom and I saw that my client had been rearrested. I later appear before the sentencing judge, and now I have the dilemma. What do? Do I disclose to the court that my client has violated one of the conditions of the plea agreement? Or do I try to get the best result for my client?
Can we ask people what they think you
Yes,
should have
sure,
done?
Sure.
Yes, disclose it.
Because
How many people think he should have disclosed it to the...
Should have or was required?
Was required to.
Well, was required to is not a question for an audience of non-lawyers. Should have is a question
Should have.
for anyone.
I'm an attorney.
Okay.
The question, though, is whether you were asked to. There's a difference if you were asked or not asked.
Well-
There's a difference of omission and omit.
That's exactly the way I resolved it. The decision that I made was that if I was asked a direct question by the court, I would, of course, have an absolute duty to be truthful with the court. But not asked, I had a countervailing duty to zealously represent my client and not be the instrumentality by which that client went to jail. Now, before we take more questions, let me just say this. Our legal system, and I disagree with Kevin, who said that there was perhaps a moral problem with the decision that he made, because the system is designed as an adversary system. The way our system of justice arrives at the version of the truth that it's looking for is by having a lawyer on each side argue as strenuously as possible, based upon the evidence, what the result should be. And the concept is that in the clash of those ideas, the truth will emerge. So you can't take one piece of the puzzle that is the entire justice system and examine it in isolation, because the system is designed to and intended to work as a whole. I'm sorry, there were some people who wanted to speak.
Question over there?
No, I'm not a lawyer.
Congratulations.
No, I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by lawyers in my life. But from a psychological perspective, when we talk about omission and commission, if the outcome or if the intent is that someone is deceived, if you lie by omission or commission, it makes no difference.
Can I? So.
I know it's different legally.
No, but.
It's a very interesting question. I think it's, again, a question of whether or not you should lie is a different question, but I think that you should somewhere admit you're lying when you're lying. I mean, if a Nazi comes to the door and they say, are you hiding a Jew? You say no, and you make
Well, but wait a minute.
You should know you're lying.
No, so that example, the don't look in the closet example, right? That is a dishonest person. Right? You're clearly lying to save Anne Frank, right? But you save Anne Frank because we value life more than truth in that circumstance. We have a profession that says, I cannot lie. I cannot ethically lie to the court, which Steve didn't do. He walked a lovely fine line between telling the truth and revealing something about his clients. He did not lie. I will tell you that Steve is one of the fairest men I know, and if he was my judge, I'd think 3 or 4 times about walking that line in front of him, because I know the next time I'm in front of him, he might learn that about me.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to point out that I had a conflict of interest at that moment, because I knew I had a very good relationship with that judge. And I was a young lawyer. I was sort of teacher's pet in that courtroom. And I knew that that judge would be very unhappy with me if he learned that I had not disclosed that information.
I'm not questioning that you didn't make the right decision. I'm only saying that from a different perspective, nevertheless, it was a lie.
Right, but the point is that if you accept my point of view and you view ethics as managing conflicting duties, yes, each time you prefer one duty over another, there is inherently a breach of duty there.
Can I ask you something? In the Anne Frank example, if you were brought before if legally you had to answer that question, you would have to tell the truth. And if you didn't tell the truth, you could take the moral high ground and make that choice, but then you would risk losing your license as a lawyer.
Right. Look,
Is that
the classic example is the police show up at your door and say, you know, Attorney Zareh, do you know where the body is? And the only reason I would know is because a client has disclosed that to me. The classic example is, and my clear duty, it's not even a close call, is I don't know, or I can't answer that question, or I refuse to cooperate, because it's a violation of my duty as an attorney. However, if the life is, if there's somebody's life that's on the line, or if grave bodily injury is about to occur, I may, not must, cooperate with the authorities and reveal some of that.
It's a more interesting question if it's not a homicide, if they're not just interested in where the body is, but if it's a kidnapping.
Yeah.
And you happen to know where the person is, presumably not yet dead. Only once, I've been a lawyer for over 25 years, and only once could I not figure out by myself what the correct thing to do was. And this is the facts. I had a woman come into my office and say that she had a problem. Could she speak with me and get legal advice about her problem? I said yes. She said, can I speak to you confidentially? I said, of course. These sorts of meetings and what we discuss is confidential. You can reveal whatever you like about what we speak about, but I'm not allowed to reveal a word of it. She then proceeds to tell me that she has information about a murder that's about to take place. The murder of a witness. The murder of a victim. The murder of a rape victim who's about to testify in the trial of her alleged rapist. And this murder would have the effect of eliminating the government's ability to prove that the crime had occurred. Now, there is an exception in the ethical rules that allows a lawyer to break the attorney-client confidence under certain circumstances, usually if it means that someone's going to be hurt, physically hurt or killed. That's an exception that allows the lawyer to break that obligation. But I didn't quite have that here because it requires that the person who's giving you this information is kind of in on it and a co-conspirator and has themselves criminal responsibility for what's about to happen, and it wasn't quite that. This was essentially, without getting into all the details, the girlfriend of the hitman, or the putative hitman, who overheard what was said, but herself was not involved in any way, shape, or form. And the problem that she had was, and she specifically told me, if I tell anybody about this killing that's about to take place, the bad guys will figure out it was me, because I'm the only weak link. I'm the only one other than the killers who even knows this information. So if you, sir, as my lawyer, tell anybody about this, they're going to kill me. What a position that was to be in. I didn't have any idea what to do. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. I keep my mouth shut. The rape victim dies. I speak up. My client dies, at least according to what she told me she believed was true. So it was on that occasion that I looked up in the telephone book the number for the very committee that I now serve on, and they had sort of a hotline to answer questions like mine. And I laid out the facts just as I did to you. I was told, in fact, this was a tough call. They were going to consult with everybody they knew on these issues and get back to me, and sure enough, within about a half an hour, I got a call back, and I was instructed or advised that there are no exceptions to the attorney-client confidences that would allow you to reveal that fact, since your client is an innocent victim herself who just happened to have this information. So you keep your mouth shut. If the witness dies, she dies.
I'm sure they put it in a slightly better way.
I think that's exactly how it was put to me. And I couldn't believe it because that answer didn't help me very much. I was still in the original conundrum. So the story has a happy ending, as it turns out. I did keep my mouth shut. as I was advised to do. And the primary reason I considered giving up my law license, because I would have lost my law license, I was told. And I've come to believe that I either would have lost my law license or I would have suffered some type of serious sanction if I violated the sanctity of the attorney-client privilege. And I considered doing it, and maybe I would have, except that I convinced myself that nothing really is solved by revealing this information. One person or the other may die. Who am I to choose? So I did keep my mouth shut. It was the most difficult experience I ever had as a lawyer. Thankfully, no harm came to this to anyone, because some type of deal worked out. These people pled guilty to the person pled guilty to the rape, so there never was a trial, and no harm ever came. But that's an example that I sometimes use to talk about the difficulty with ethical issues and telling the truth and when to speak up and so forth.
You know, I'd like to just play the devil's advocate for a second and argue with what I think you might conclude is one of the messages of the film, or at least a message of the organizer of the project that the film focuses on. And that is this kind of binary approach to honesty. You're kind of left with the impression that we should always be honest, and that being dishonest is always wrong. Maybe I've overstated it.
I don't think that's what we were saying. I think we're saying dishonesty is dangerous.
I really didn't mean that the filmmaker was making that.
No, Dan doesn't think that either.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. But what I wanted to, the point that I wanted to make is that even in those lawyers in the room will remember that in the first year of law school, we take a required course in criminal law. And one of the things that they teach us is that there are two different types of misconduct. One is called a malum in se, and this is conduct that is illegal because it's wrong. It's inherently morally wrong, like murder, larceny, and rape. But there's other conduct that is not illegal because it's wrong. It's wrong because it's illegal. We call this type of conduct thank you. We call this kind of conduct a malum prohibitum. And there was mention of one such type of misconduct in the film, and that's speeding. I don't think anyone would argue that there's an inherent moral difference between going 70 miles an hour and going 50 miles an hour. But we adopt speeding laws because we find it a safer way to organize our society. Some of these laws are adopted because it's a more efficient or more economical way of organizing our society. So there are transgressions that don't involve moral turpitude. And ethics questions are, I think, are much more difficult than adopting a principle that there's a certain type of conduct that you should always adhere to.
I think we really believe that honesty is one of many human values, and it is not always the most important. But certainly in the workplace, we are put in positions in which acting well is very, very difficult. And I think it's interesting that in law there is so much regulation of your conduct, and yet in a lot of other businesses there is far less, and it's interesting.
I just want to say one thing. As a comment on the film and the message that I caught from the film, because you spoke about the message, I want to just make sure I got this correct. During the film, did he say that after he told them to write all the 10 Commandments out, and they started to write it, and after that everybody was honest?
So hold on, in the context of the math matrix experiment, once they wrote the 10 Commandments, they wrote 4 of them, 5 of them, nobody remembered all 10. People did not cheat.
People did not cheat, right, exactly. So the message I got is, if we taught people to believe in God more.
No, not at all. No, because then Dan says, then we looked in a non-religious environment, if we sign a code of honor, the same thing happens. So the point is being reminded of our better selves, being reminded of our moral selves and who we think we should be, makes us not cheat.
When people think of the Ten Commandments, they usually think of God. When they think of God, they're less likely to cheat.
Right, but even secular people who thought, even atheists who thought of the Ten Commandments didn't cheat.
By the way, that's exactly why an oath is administered in court before a witness testifies. The purpose of an oath is to remind the witness of the duty to tell the truth.
And you know, hopefully you're not walking into a courtroom anytime soon, but we have trappings to remind you of that, right? In God we trust, and there's a seal above your head, and we make you take an oath, and you come up to the stand where people can hear you. It's all about making sure that you understand you're about to do something very important. We value the truth here.
So one of the experiments that Dan wanted to do and has now been done by one of these behavioral insights team, the one that we documented in England, Obama on September 15th issued an executive order that we should use behavioral science to help solve big problems. So one of the problems that, because of this signing before and after, one of the experiments that was done by one of these behavioral insights teams, I think somewhere in South America, was to have people sign their taxes before rather than after. Dan always says, if you sign at the bottom, cheating's already all done. Like, you're done. 2 weeks of cheating, you're not going to go back and change your results. But if you actually were to sign before you start, maybe it would change. And in fact, the experiments are showing that it doesn't erase cheating entirely, but there's actually a statistical benefit to signing first rather than afterwards.
Charismatic person to make a film about? Did you have a relationship with him, or did you hear about it? How did you, because you did it.
Yes, Dan and I are having an affair. No. Dan and I are actually, we met because we are related, but never met growing up. And we met about 6 or 7 years ago and wanted to work together. Dan was interested in doing some filmed material, and I loved his work. And so we were working on developing a TV show around the subject that he is most famous for, which is irrationality, how we all act irrationally, but not just irrationally, against our better self-interest. And irrationality led him to dishonesty. And as his book was coming out called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, How We Lie to Everyone, Especially Ourselves, he said to me, wouldn't it be interesting to interview some people who've lied and whose lives came unraveled as a result? So, but we interviewed lots of people. We interviewed Judge Rakoff as one of our experts on lying. He was very interesting. I thought he was somebody who goes to sleep at night very sure of right and wrong all the time.
Can I ask, what did you think of the mother who enrolled her daughters in father's school district?
Who would do the same thing? Who thinks it was a terrible thing to do?
I kind of wish I was on her jury.
Okay, but to be fair, she was tried not because she changed the address for her kids the first time. It's because she continued to lie. She changed her driver's license. She changed other documents. But her story is so powerful that even though we include that in the film, it's really overshadowed by the story.
I noticed an irony in the film, and that it was the...
Just one?
Well, one that stood out, it was the irony of the story, the news account, the news reporting of the MIT admissions officer's fall from grace being reported by Brian Williams.
So I will tell you that was one of the worst moments of my career. We finished everything on the film, and finishing a film is complicated from a lot of technical perspectives, so doing final color and sound, and truly everything was finished on a Monday. And on Wednesday, the Brian Williams story broke, and I was in a panic, especially because, if you'll notice, our co-producers are CNBC. Now, they had no creative control, but I really, really did not know what to do. I thought we should open up the film, take him out, or wait for him to have some kind of mea culpa statement, which never came. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, we decided, you know what, we're just going to leave it exactly the way it is. So it was crazy.
Thank you for the film. It was, thought-provoking. The story of the mother who lied about residency for her children. That was the most heartbreaking to me. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a teacher. I've been a kindergarten teacher for 26 years, so we certainly have questions about residency. And, I do my duty as a social worker, but I've always felt sympathetic to the parent, and I've never heard the story with that kind of consequence of going to jail. But just a comment, in the 26 years since I've been teaching, always 5- and 6-year-olds, whether I'm older and wiser, I don't know, but it definitely seems that children are more dishonest now than they were years ago, yet they're more sophisticated in many ways. But their lies are just so sophisticated how they can just manipulate it. And I'm not even, I don't believe in cornering a child. Did you do? If I saw something, please don't do. And there's a whole made-up rationale for it. And in the film, it reinforced to me that the more you lie...
...is that if you lie a lot, especially in the same domain, it's not clear that lying in one domain necessarily infects the way you behave in others. So Dan did a very interesting experiment in Turkey during Ramadan to see if people are more honest during Ramadan than at other times of the year. And it turns out they are more honest, but they're more honest in all those things having to do with religion. So how you treat your spouse, they were much more honest. But how you pay your taxes was not affected at all. So lying is really, in general, on a domain-by-domain basis. Whether kids are lying more now or not, I don't know, and we don't have any insight into why that might be. That is possible. That is possible. Yeah. The fact that it's domain by domain doesn't mean that people don't lie in many domains. So,
do you find a correlation between creativity and lying?
That the more highly creative might be, their lives would be more sophisticated, but the rate of lying might not necessarily increase.
That's a really optimistic way to look at it. You just have more creative children now as a teacher. I will say Dan has done experiments. It does turn out that more creative people do lie more, and Dan says it's because they tell themselves better stories. There is no such correlation on more intelligence. More intelligent people do not lie more, so it's interesting. That's why he called his institute the Center for Advanced Hindsight, because every time he would come to these conclusions, everybody would go, oh yeah, that makes sense, even though the reverse would also make sense.
I do have one question about the film. The premise that truth-telling or fiction-telling is either rational or irrational. The concept of rationality playing a role here. And I wonder if it could be true that most lying is rational, because my experience has been that people act in their self-interest, and when they're thinking about telling a fib, in every instance, they do an instantaneous risk-reward analysis. And what keeps people law-abiding oftentimes is the fear of getting caught and the fear of consequence. You know, if you have surveillance cameras set up at a convenience store with big signs, look at the surveillance cameras, you'll find maybe people at that store will get stolen from less because of fear of consequence.
I think in a lot of these cases, nobody was thinking about fibbing. Well, not nobody. There are lots of examples of people fibbing, not just in their own interest. I mean, Kelly, clearly for her daughters, she benefits tremendously. But I think Matt and Garrett, they cheated for themselves, but they also cheated for each other. They did it as friends. I think Walt is super interesting, the story at the end of MCI. I think Walt really felt that he initially started cheating in order to help his company and make the numbers work. Now, yes, he benefited. His bonus was higher. The regard from his colleagues was higher, but I don't think he went into it saying, oh, this is a good thing, so I will do it. I mean, I think the best example right now is Volkswagen. I don't think anybody thought that was, rationally thought that was a good idea. My guess is that some engineer thought that some other company was doing it, they found this clever thing, they put it in, they stopped thinking about it, and it just grew.
One of the things I thought was very interesting about the film is that the different vignettes, the different types of dishonesty that that was in evidence was interesting, how diverse it was. And in particular, I thought that the guerrilla public relations guy was qualitatively different in a way than some of the others. First of all, because he was operating in the marketplace, where a certain amount of puffery is expected, a certain amount of self-energy, okay, a certain amount of muscular self-interest is expected, and we might agree that he crossed the line and that he was engaged in dishonest conduct, but I thought it was of a different nature and a different quality than some of the other lies that we saw.
I think in many ways Ryan is kind of the most dangerous of them all, because he suffered no consequences. And yet, I think that activity that he engages in so many, and a lot of young people look at Ryan and think he's super smart, which he is, but it erodes our trust in public information and in journalism on a regular basis. So.
This is a more personal question for you. I don't think of myself as a liar, but I also know that I sometimes lie to myself, and I sometimes have small lies maybe to make myself look better to somebody, or things that I don't think have any kind of real consequence other than someone maybe thinking about me a little bit differently. But when I think about this kind of a film, and you watch this kind of a film, you start re-examining yourself and saying, is that right? Should I be doing that? Is that the example I want to set for my kids and such? So I'm wondering, when you got into this project with Dan, did you have that same thought where you started looking at yourself and your family and people around you, and did your opinion towards yourself change as it pertains to dishonesty and truthfulness?
Yeah, so I say I am a lab experiment. I am much more honest now, but I tell people I'm not more honest because I decided it was the right thing to do. I'm more honest because I think about it all the time. So I see the world through that lens. I see a lot of dishonesty around me. I was in Los Angeles last week and thinking about the agency world that I navigate, where people lie all the time, that I think has really damaged our film industry, but that's a whole other conversation. But I will say my favorite, I'm asked this question a lot, and at one Q&A I said the answer which I just told you, which is, yeah, I'm much more honest than I used to be. And at one Q&A there was this loud in the audience, which was my son, reminding everybody that I'm not so honest all the time. So.
First of all, I'd say that Ryan was the PR guy.
The marketing guy, Ryan.
So
he wrote a book called Trust Me, I'm Lying.
His difference was just qualitative in his work. Okay, I mean, he did a little more than some people do. But in that world, you know, everyone is trying to get airtime. And the creative people, I believe, in many cases are involved in creating a subjective representation of reality. So I think that that's part of the reason you call it lying, but you know they're doing it for the purpose of you know, a broader illustration of a point. I wanted to ask the panel though, you know, I think your legal profession is different because one of your primary concerns is as arbiters of the truth. So there are a lot of other industries that don't have as strictly codified ethics. You know, they may be written down. Some of them are very loose. Some of them don't exist. They're just by common understanding. So really then, you know, the higher decision is the moral decision. As Kevin said, he's faced a conundrum. that you might have had to make a moral decision in that case with the woman that came to you about the murder of the rape victim. So I think that...
What's the question?
Well, the question is that you think that it varies based on profession and that people ultimately have to make a moral decision.
Well, I think it helps law tremendously that there are such strict, I think rules, I've come away from this project believing that more rules are better, and that we often want, the cost of freedom is a lot of gray zone that is actually not very good for us. We need more help as human beings in a lot of different areas, and we accept rules. In driving, for example, we accept a lot of rules. But in other areas, we don't. I mean, you know, take cigarettes as an example. Why should there be cigarettes? We all know that they are now completely unhealthy and they cost a tremendous amount of money to our health system and to us personally. Why are they still available? And I'm not saying we should, I don't know that I would vote that we should ban them, but it is a really odd thing that we expect them to be available knowing that they kill us. So there are a lot of examples like that, and I think, you know, this is my obsession for the last 2 years, so I go and ask everybody, where does lying bother them the most? And I will say what do you guys think? What domain are people most bothered by lying?
Domestic relations.
Infidelity.
Yeah.
So actually most people say politics.
Yeah.
Politics. And,
more than the home life, really?
More than home life. Most people say politicians. It just bothers me so much. And I think the position that we put politicians in, or that politicians find themselves in, is completely untenable. We put them in cauldrons of conflicts of interest, in which they have to go out and raise money, but they have to pretend, but they should pretend that that money has no impact. It's impossible.
Right, and in order to be elected, you have to get the most votes. And in order to get the most votes, you have to appeal to the most voters. And that, you know, Richard Nixon once said about the Republican Party that to get the nomination, you have to run to the right. And to get elected, you have to run to the left. And of course, the opposite is true on the Democratic side of the aisle. So you have to reshape yourself. But I would like to return to the question that the gentleman asked about different industries and how these principles may apply differently or in the same way. I think it comes down to what is your duty and to whom do you owe it? And if there are multiple duties, to whom do you owe the highest duty? And in the legal, and that's why I think that the marketing guy's story was kind of interesting, because it's a little bit more complicated to figure out who he owed a duty to. Does the duty exist in the air? Is there a duty of loyalty just by virtue of being a member of society? Does that impose upon us? I'm sorry, not a duty of loyalty, a duty of honesty. Is that the source of our duty? But in the legal profession, we have very clearly defined duties. And that's true to greater or lesser extents in other occupations.
I think ethics is important across society. Journalism schools teach journalistic ethics. Medical schools teach medical ethics, not to do unnecessary medical procedures. Journalists maybe not to put a piece in the newspaper.
But advertisers don't have a lot of
there are some
advertising ethics.
Like the wild, wild west. I mean, the automobile industry, the case that was cited, Volkswagen. General Motors allowed 100 people or more to die due to faulty ignition switches by everybody's account. Nobody's been arrested or indicted for that yet, remarkably so. So society says that it loves truth, but sometimes it's conflicted about when it needs to emerge.
Well, so about the professions and which professions should have more ethical behavior, more rules. You know, we believe, and I think I believe, that the more rules there are for businesses, businesses will not prosper. There's already too much red tape. It's hard for us to do anything, especially in Nassau County, but that's all a separate issue. However, the thing that was very clear from the film, and what I perceive when people walk in my door, business folks, they often don't have enough ethical guidelines to conduct themselves. And if you belong to an organization or you work for an employer that has guidelines and ethics and values this and doesn't reward people who cut corners, I think it's helpful. I think that that would help out tremendously. You know, even the cigarette issue, right? Why do we have cigarettes here? You know, cigarettes are much less available than when I was a kid. But, you know, those same companies are probably selling the same cigarettes somewhere around the world where people don't have as much ability to stop it from coming in and stop their kids from smoking the poison.
A few years ago, there was a case involving a doctor, Dr. Horn, employed by the New York Times. She worked in a clinic that was established to provide medical services to employees of the New York Times. The New York Times wanted Dr. Horn to report to them about the medical condition of employees who filed disability claims. She refused to provide them with confidential medical information about these employees who were her patients. They decided, you know what, maybe we don't need a medical clinic after all. And they fired Dr. Horn. Dr. Horn sued the New York Times, and the question was whether an employee of a physician could fire the physician for refusing, at the employer's request, to violate the code of ethics of her profession. And the trial court, by the way, how many think this case turned out in favor of Dr. Horn? How many think it turned out in favor of the New York Times? Well, the trial court sided with the New York Times, saying that in the state of New York, we have what is called an at-will doctrine, a very strong at-will doctrine, meaning that if you don't have an employment contract that gives you a certain term of employment, you're employed at the pleasure of the employer, and you can be fired at any time for any reason, provided it's not an illegal reason, like certain types of discrimination. Well, it went to the intermediate appellate court, and the intermediate appellate court said, wait a second. This doctor has a legal obligation to follow the ethics of her profession. It's much better for our society if we have ethical doctors, and they reversed the trial court's decision. Then it went to New York's highest court. Now I'll ask you again, how many think the state's highest court sided with Dr. Horn? How many say the New York Times? Well, I'm afraid to say that the New York Times was the winner of that case.
Wait, did it go to the Supreme Court?
No,
oh.
no. There it ended. Now, that's New York law. That's New York law. Interestingly, there's one profession and one profession only in which an employer may not fire an employee for violating the professional code of ethics. How many of you can guess what that is? The legal profession. And the rationale is that the legal profession, in some of the ways that we've described, is a self-regulating profession. But I ask, isn't it just as important that we have ethical architects who won't design buildings that collapse on us, as it is that we have ethical lawyers and, of course, doctors?
And just to piggyback off of that, how many young lawyers have the backbone to stand up to the person who just hired you, who's asked you to walk a funny line and say, I can't do that, right? It's against my moral compass, and it's against the ethical rules. It takes a lot of inner strength, I would hope, and integrity to be ethical lawyers.
I'll share one story from the film that is not from the shooting that is not here. One of the nicest interviews we had was with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara, who was amazing. He said he sees it as his duty to go and speak with a lot of students in business schools, and he always says to them, and he said to me, and it makes them laugh, he says, I say to them, I'm not talking to the one or two of you who are going to go to jail for fraud. I'm talking to all the rest of you who are going to face some gray zone or ethical issues in your work, and I urge you to speak up. I really urge you to do that. And the other thing he said was, and he spoke very beautifully about his office and the mantle that he felt that he was continuing, and how he makes it clear all the time in meetings, and they remind each other that any evidence that comes in that weakens their case from the other side, they must, absolutely must, reveal, and that they adhere by the rules of the court, because it is so important to the integrity of that office. And it actually falls very much in line with Dan's research and what we are talking about, and all the things that we're doing, curricula and corporate training and all of that around the film, that this notion of reminders is so important, and how we can create systems in which we remind each other, remind ourselves and others better. So.
I guess it's getting late, but there is one other thing that I want to mention, and that is, you mentioned this great concern that exists about honesty and integrity in government. Well, government ethics actually is my primary area of practice in the field of ethics. And I can tell you, just as the film indicated that honesty and dishonesty occur with about the same frequency in the US and China and South America and Africa and all over the world, government officers and employees bear pretty much the same characteristics as the rest of humanity. There are tall ones, there are short ones, there are fat ones, there are skinny ones. And overwhelmingly, they're basically honest people, just like you and me, and genuinely want to do the right thing if they're assisted in knowing what the right thing is. So ethics education is really vitally important in the field of government ethics in particular, but ethics generally, and I think that is also a theme that we have here today.
Yeah, on that note, I just want to say, ethics education, those of you who do need CLE credit and did come for CLE credit, please make sure that you take a form. The Nassau Academy of Law was really instrumental in helping put together this panel and make sure that this was a CLE certified event. And I'm sorry to cut it short. We can continue in the lobby because they do have other movies that have to go on. Wait, before you get up, we just want to say a huge thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Especially to Yael Melamede for coming straight from Denmark to share her film and to her thoughts and her experiences making this film.
And thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.